Hey, so here in our third video for world mythology, we're leaving behind some of that introductory work and we're diving into our first close reading of a whole bunch of different world mythology from cultures all over the place. And we start our study with cosmic myths. And cosmic myths can be divided into three subcategories: creation stories, flood stories, and apocalypse stories. And we'll get into all three of those categories. But for these next couple of weeks, let's sit with creation stories. There's a lot of them, and there's a lot of stuff to chew on, a lot of really good stuff. So all I want to accomplish in this little video is kind of help you build a toolkit for the work ahead. And let's think about cosmic myths, again, specifically creation stories, in kind of a general sense. And let's ask some big questions about what tends to go on in them. What are some of the varieties and approaches we're going to see? And always the most interesting question for me is, what are they for? What's the real purpose? What question were these ancient people trying to answer with their creation stories? Were they trying to answer the question, who made the world, when, and how? Or were they asking deeper, richer, cosmological kinds of questions? So let's tackle all that work here in this first video on cosmic myths. So cosmic myths, you hear the word cosmos in there, and cosmos, K-O-S-M-O-S, is the ancient Greek word for order. And it's what they called the universe. You know, we use the word cosmos to mean the universe. Those are synonymous terms, right? The cosmos, the universe. But it's interesting to notice that for the ancient Greeks, that was their word for order. It's like calling all of this order or structure or natural law or the pattern. And so cosmos has that power to it, right? It doesn't just mean whatever the universe is. It makes a claim about the universe, that it is an organized, orderly, interconnected whole. So right there in the very word is a kind of cosmological argument. A position is taken on the nature of the cosmos right in the very word itself. So we're living with that word in our study of cosmic myths. And in fact, cosmology is the study of the cosmos, the science or study of the cosmos. Not quite astronomy, right? That's about like how stars and planets and galaxies work. But cosmology pulls back from that and says, yeah, but what is it? And how does it operate in total, beyond astronomy? And then there's a new word maybe to you and I in this study, cosmogony. And you're reading that in the Leeming book, cosmogony, from cosmos and Genesis. And many of you know the Greek word Genesis means birth or beginning. And so cosmogony is an origin story about the cosmos, an even more specific topic within cosmology. Cosmogonies are creation stories. So that's the fancy word for creation story or creation myth that we're about to dip into. We're going to study a bunch of cosmogonies. So that's a word we learn and use in this class and we'll probably never use again, but hey, that's how college works, right? We want to talk the talk of what scholars of mythology are doing, what they're up to, so we can enter into dialogue with them. Yeah, that's all we need words like that for. And they may work for you on some future appearance on Jeopardy or something, I don't know. Now, our book does a nice job, and I want to kind of sketch through these quickly with you as well, of delineating and defining the different kinds of cosmogonies or creation stories that we're going to encounter. So the first one is ex nihilo. That's Latin for out of nothing, from nothing. And so that's one kind of creation story. Some argue, like in the crash course videos we're going to be watching, some argue that the Genesis story is an ex nihilo story, because in the very first line, yeah, God made the heavens and the earth. Like there wasn't anything and then there was something suddenly. God apparently existed before all that, but and you see those kinds of creation stories. Then there's one called chaos creation. And chaos creation stories tell a little bit of a different linear narrative there, that the universe doesn't come from nothing, but it comes from a kind of big mess, a kind of a big chaos of maybe primordial waters or some kind of cosmic egg. You often see the cosmic egg thing. And I wonder, which is Genesis? Is Genesis an ex nihilo story out of nothing? Or is it a chaos creation story? Because, you know, again, right in those first couple of lines of Genesis, which we'll study in the next video, by the way, you see, you know, all was void and formless. And so there seems to be, God seems to be working with something, right? He's bringing order out of chaos. So it depends on which aspect of Genesis you focus on. Is it an ex nihilo or is it a chaos creation story? Yeah, we'll ask those kinds of questions as we go on. There's three more types I want to sketch with you. World parent creation. Yeah, this is a big one. We're going to see this in all the Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Sumerian stuff, the Greek stuff, Egyptian stuff. So here there is some kind of world parents, you know, the cosmic fathers and mothers who give birth to themselves, and then they have a bunch of kids. And out of those pantheons, those families of gods, those houses of gods, sometimes they're united, sometimes they're separated, sometimes one of them gets like slaughtered and ripped apart and her body becomes the cosmos. You know, those are common creation motifs for sure, the world parent creation. A fourth one is emergence creation. And these last two, emergence creation and earth diver creation, you see quite commonly here in the Americas. So among Native American creation stories, from the North Pole to the South Pole, all of it, when you dip into their creation stories, emergence creation is that an opening in the earth appears and then everything crawls out of that. All of the animals come out, people come out, kind of an earth womb, kind of a mother goddess vibe, obviously. And then the earth diver creation story, this is when there's a primordial sea and then someone dives down and gets all the stuff and brings it back up, brings up the animals, brings up the people, brings up the sun and moon and all of that. So those are just some of the varieties that we're going to encounter as we study creation myths. Be on the lookout for those, and now they're all in your notes, which is good. There's another piece I want to think about with you, and just pulling back even further now and looking at all creation stories in general. Look for these typical elements. One, of course, there is the creation of the world, the creation of the universe. I mean, I guess that was too obvious, right? But that's what creation stories are about, the origin of all of this. Also, notice that this is a constant theme, right? Bringing order out of chaos. And that's, again, as we talked about at the top of this video, that's packed right into the word cosmos, cosmic myth, cosmogony, cosmology. And we'll see it in the book of Genesis when we study that in our next video, that God is taking disorder and out of it creating order. So that's always one of the teachings of all creation stories, that the universe makes sense somehow. There's a pattern here that we need to kind of understand and figure out, maybe even come to master. And we, of course, are a part of that pattern. Also notice that this kind of, this waterfall effect is often in a lot of these creation stories. And by that I mean there is an original unity. And from that singularity, from that unity comes the two. You know, we'll see this in the Egyptian creation story. Atum is the primordial god, genderless, who gives birth to himself. And then in the Egyptian myth, Atum gives birth to the primal mother-father. And from the primal mother-father, a male-female, come all of the descendants, and then the whole pantheon pours out of that. So from unity into duality, or into multiplicity, into many. And you see that especially in the polytheistic mythological systems. It's a little different in Genesis where you have monotheism, one God, right? But it still has a sense in which from God, the biblical God, comes Adam and Eve. Male, female. Again, from the singularity comes the duality, and from the duality comes everything else. So look for that kind of waterfall effect as well. And also often present is the interplay between opposites, often personified as male and female deities, of course. Sometimes they're unified and they get along great. Other times there's great battles, like look at the Greek myths from the Theogony. We're going to see a lot of conflict, Gaia and Uranus. It's not a good marriage. It's not a good partnership, and it ends horribly. And that pattern gets repeated as we go on down through the generations that come from the primal mother, father, God, Gaia, and Uranus. Finally, in many of these creation myths, especially in these big pantheons, look for the war or the conflict in the upper realm, to put a finer point on it, intergenerational battle. Intergenerational battle. Children or grandchildren going to war against their parents or their grandparents. It's a big theme in the Babylonian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian stories from the Enuma Elish. There is, again, there are unhappy families everywhere in mythology, and it often ends in absolute mayhem and violence and dismemberment and chaos. And so that gets us to a kind of a deeper question, and that is, what are these creation myths really for? What are they really asking? What are they really trying to teach us about the cosmos and our place in it? Are these creation myths about questions like who made the world, why, and how? That seems to be the answer that creationists are looking for. You know what I'm talking about, right? A subset of Christianity. Not all Christians are creationists, but all creationists are Christians. So there is a subset of Christianity of people who read the Genesis story literally. And we've already discussed that in our first few videos, how from Joseph Campbell's perspective, what a misstep that is, and how important it is to learn how to read myth metaphorically. We've spent a lot of time working on that, practicing that already. But creationists, to give them their moment here in the sun, they decide to read their Genesis story as a scientific paper, as a fact. And so for them, they're perfectly content that the purpose of the book of Genesis is to answer the questions, who made the world, how, and that's it. But folks like Joseph Campbell and other scholars of mythology suspect that there's a lot more going on in these creation stories than just that. Were the people who told these ancient stories, were they not in fact asking different questions? Not who made the world and how, but who and what am I? And what is all of this? In other words, if I can figure out the origin of the universe, maybe in doing that, I would get crucial information, important answers to the question, what is my nature? What am I supposed to be doing with my life, with these latent powers? Where do I fit in? And so that gets us back to the cosmological function. Remember, again, Campbell's 4 functions of myth: the metaphysical or mystical function, the cosmological function, the sociological function, and the pedagogical function. Y'all have that in your notes, and we've discussed that at length and practiced applying it. And we're going to continue practicing applying it, like right now. So let's ask that question. What is the cosmological function of a creation story? If I could know what the universe's purpose is, then I would know what my purpose is. And you recall that's what the cosmological function mostly is. A myth has to explain how this cosmos, this order, this universe, how it interlocks with itself, how it works together, and therefore how I fit in. What's my place in it? What's my relative value? We'll see some creation stories where human beings are basically worthless. In some of the Mesopotamian Sumerian stories, human beings are just designed as an afterthought, as workers to bring the gods platters of, cheese and wine. Just servants. Not a very exalted vision of human purpose. And then we'll see in the Egyptian myth a very different sense in which human beings have a kind of a loving relationship with the mother, father creators and have a purpose. We are here to maintain the order of Mat, of justice, of the, the organizational energy of the cosmos. We are to collaborate in that administration of justice in the Egyptian myths, and look at Genesis, which we'll look at quite closely. That we are made from the essence of God. God picks up dirt, blows his spirit into it, and makes man. So there's a sense in which human beings have a pretty elevated position in the Genesis story compared to the Sumerian ones, for sure. So isn't that what creation stories finally are about? Not who made the world or how, but what does it all mean and where do I fit into it? That's the cosmological function. And you would expect to find heavy doses of the cosmological function at play in these cosmogonies, in these creation stories. So keep this in mind as you head into this reading that we're going to be doing and the videos that we're going to be watching from the Crash Course series in all of these wonderful creation stories from all over the place. Look especially for the cosmological function. And also some of the others too, the sociological, the pedagogical, etc. So keep that in mind and it'll really open up these stories. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of cool stories and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? So here in our study, now you know what you're supposed to do with it. Look for these 4 functions. Look for answers to the question, why did they write these stories? Why do they keep telling these stories for thousands and thousands of years? They must have power. They must have purpose. They must have deep, vivifying, nourishing value to the human beings who love these stories, who build religions around these stories, and who tell these stories to their children as soon as they are able. So in our next video, we will dive into really the dominant creation story in our culture, and that is the one found in the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2 in the Hebrew Bible. So I'll see you on the other side.